Hi everybody, it's Suzanne Granchamp, divorce attorney, author, and coach. Well, I've got the uniform on again today, and you know that you're going to get some great free legal information. Just a caveat or a disclaimer before we get started. Legal information is not legal advice. It's just generalized information that's designed to educate you. And it's different from legal advice in that legal advice actually is specific to your jurisdiction, which is the state and county in which you reside. So I always encourage you to make an initial consultation. Many times they're free, with an attorney in good standing who's licensed to practice in your state and who practices in the county in which you live. Today we're going to tackle a big topic, and that's divorcing a narcissist or other cluster B personality. What you need to know. Cluster B personalities, which include narcissist, borderline, antisocial, and histrionic, tend to act in similar fashions in intimate relationships. Given this, a therapist friend of mine recently said that they don't spend a lot of time with their therapy clients, who are never the cluster Bs, trying to assess the client's spouse. What are the hallmarks of being in an intimate relationship with a cluster B personality? At first, love bombing and way too much intimacy that is too deep, too soon. They'll tell you all their deep, dark secrets and want to become sexual right away. They'll ooze praise while stroking your ego. Idealization, data mining, and future faking. Broad, sweeping statements like, "You're the one," that are not congruent with the amount of time you've known each other. It actually takes a really long time to get to know someone and all their different facets. Once you're hooked, then cue devaluation and discard. You're no different at that point from the mud they scrape off from the bottom of their shoe. And they'll make sure you know this in no uncertain terms. Then, when they need something from you, sex, your money, empathy, compassion, which you probably have in spades, then the hoovering and idealization will suck you back in to restart the cycle, only this time, and in all future re-ups of the cycle, you're not going to get as much of the good stuff. They'll breadcrumb you over time, only giving you little bits of attention and for shorter periods of time that aren't as satisfying. Along the way, you can expect gaslighting. "I didn't say that. You're crazy. You're making that up." Darvo, which is deny, attack, reverse victim offender, which is blame shifting in any conflict, making you the responsible party. Then they'll try to make you think you're the crazy one, which is more gaslighting. If you blow up at them, which is called reactive abuse, and that becomes inevitable with how frustrated you'll be with their antics. If this describes your spouse, don't tell him or her of what you suspect. This will only throw them into a defensive and projecting rage in which they'll accuse you of being the cluster B. Divorcing this type of person is tricky. First, know this: the divorce will definitely trigger a narcissistic injury or a deathly fear of abandonment if we're dealing with a borderline. And there will be rage and control and scheming and anything that's worked in the past to control you, especially more love bombing. And it will all be intense. It's what's known as an extinction burst. And guess what? You're the target. Second, you've got to create a plan. I refer to it as an escape hatch. Action item number 1, find the right attorney. Meet with an attorney who either specializes in helping people divorce cluster B personalities or knows a heck of a lot about it and has been through it. It was my practice specialty, and I know a lot about this topic because I both studied it and unfortunately lived through it myself. The attorney you hire also has to be a strong litigator, because this is often the only way to get through the divorce. because the cluster B will continue the non-binding proceedings like direct negotiation, mediation, cooperative law, and collaborative law with a big C and big L forever and ever and ever, because they're getting so much supply or attention from the proceeding. The answer is almost always the court system, which imposes timelines and deadlines. While many people may disagree with me, I believe these cases aren't cases for mediation or collaborative law unless your plan is to roll over on many of the issues simply to get out of the marriage, which can be a strategy if kids aren't involved and there aren't a lot of financial resources to argue over. Your attorney also has to know the judicial bench in your jurisdiction and be familiar, ideally, with how the judge assigned to your case views domestic abuse. There is a push nowadays from judges across the board to shunt cases into mediation or other forms of alternative dispute resolution. That's great for the vast majority of cases, but not for high conflict cases involving a cluster B personality. If you have no money to hire a private attorney, you can try to qualify to be represented on a pro bono basis. Many bar associations have pro bono funnels and also reach out to legal aid. If you don't qualify, then scrape together enough money to pay for an hour or two of an attorney's time to learn about the topics I've discussed above without formally retaining them. Once you've secured an attorney, you need to go ahead and marshal and secure and safeguard additional financial resources. These cases tend to be very expensive, and I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. The reason they tend to be so expensive is because the cluster B personality tends to want to continue the conflict because they get supply or attention from the proceeding. If you don't have much access to financial resources, consider just using the court's online paperwork, and I'm also developing a DIY divorce kit that will be available soon, and you can fill out the paperwork and file the case, moving it through the court system. Otherwise, if there are no kids, consider potentially just giving your ex what he or she wants to get the case done and over with. It's often cheaper in all ways, financially, emotionally, and even spiritually in the long run. The hardest situation is when there are kids and no money. To be clear, unless there is documented abuse like an ongoing criminal proceeding or a viable CHIPS petition, and CHIPS is an acronym, CHIPS, for Children in Need of Protective Services. But unless you have one of those, you'll be parenting with a cluster B personality, period. Parenting is almost never suspended or restricted. How do you survive this? Well, one of the best ways is to have a formal parenting time schedule for regular parenting time as well as summer and holidays, with pickup and drop-off times, ideally at school or daycare. Also ask that either a parenting time consultant or a parenting time expediter or even an arbitrator be appointed to the case to decide any parenting time issues that the two of you cannot resolve. That way, you'll have an intermediary. Your cluster B spouse, to be clear, will not want this. They'll want to run roughshod over you. Sell it to the court this way. Then we don't have to come back to you, Judge, with any future arguments. The third action item in the escape hatch is to create a detailed exit strategy. I've done the heavy lifting for you. I've created a 6-step process to do this, and you can get access to it by clicking on the link below. But just to give you a summary, you've got to go ahead and figure out where you're going to live. You have to line up your emotional support allies, not just a therapist or a coach. You have to safeguard super precious and priceless objects over a period of time so that the cluster B doesn't necessarily notice. And number 4, once you've secured financial resources, you have to move them into a separate account that the cluster B isn't aware of initially. Number 5, you need to spend a good amount of time figuring out exactly how you're going to tell your spouse. And again, I go into this in detail in the exit strategy that you can access below by clicking the link. And then finally, you've got to follow through. Once you take action to get the divorce underway, you've got to keep it moving forward. Because if you backslide and re-enter the relationship with a cluster B, it will be a billion times worse. They will make you pay dearly for your blatant disloyalty. In conclusion, it's never easy to divorce a cluster B spouse. These cases are often high conflict, protracted, and expensive. In going through the divorce, you need to understand the basics of narcissistic abuse, which many cluster B personalities have as a part of their toolkit and deploy in personal relationships. You'll need an attorney with a strong litigation background who is well-versed in narcissistic abuse and cluster B personalities. Finally, you'll need a lot of resources, both financial and emotional, to get through the divorce. It ain't easy, but it is doable. And for my clients, it has always been a more preferable option than staying in a marriage in which they were psychologically abused.